thank you for the opportunity to be presenting to you. This is very exciting. I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm not exactly a TED talker, so please bear with me. My title is Right to be Remembered, and I think the discussion about Marx created a nice bridge to this. How should we remember Marx? However, that's the last time I'm going to mention Marx during this presentation. This is about trying to create discussion, what I see as being the kind of the other side of the privacy coin, and introducing a new concept to the MyData discussion. However, I'm not an expert on the MyData discussion, so if there is already discussion about this concept or topic, please feel free to correct me, and also feel free to ask questions at any point, and questions and clarifications. But anyway, to me, the core of MyData is the data subjects' autonomy and sovereignty in terms of their own data. And after listening to the discussions and presentations today, I don't feel I'm very much off the mark here. My definition of data in the context of this presentation is digital traces we live in the world when we go about our lives, and of course human lives are intertwined, which gets us to our data theme. And I see the GDPR. This has largely to do with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, but because I'm European and it's been a big discussion here, but many of the ideas here can be generalized and go beyond just GDPR or any legislation on data privacy or privacy. But anyway, but I see the GDPR and the privacy discussion as a challenge to the shared narration of lives, which as an act and practice is as old as history, to be exact. It's history itself, and that's what my presentation is about. And there are two ways to approach history and identifiable human data: the perspective of using the data and the perspective of collecting and depositing or archiving the data. And my approach falls more in the latter category. So, but before I jump into the theme, just a few words about myself, because contextualization is something that is at the center of the historical method, and this is me contextualizing myself as a researcher. I'm a early career. I'm a PhD student at the University of Helsinki, but before that I've worked several years in research policy, science policy fields, and also still I'm very much involved in those discussions in Finland and internationally through the Finnish Committee for Research Data Alliance, and International Science Council's Data Committee, CoData. So I'm responsible for the question that was up on the screen.io. I thought that would be a nice start to this talk, to just before going into it, to kind of test the waters a little bit. So it would be, there it is. Okay, 3 answers. That's not exactly representative.
No, we have more. Those are included in the descriptions. There's no.
Oh yeah. I wrote. Sorry. Yeah, that's true. Can we see? Well, it doesn't really matter how many answered.
16.
Still, to be remembered, 1. Yay! Well, of course, it's not black and white, and there was at least one comment about this, that it depends on how one is remembered. That it's important to be remembered on our own terms and in a way that does justice to us, and that is exactly what the ethics of history is about. So before again, a lot of introductions and detours, but before we get to the right to be remembered, a few words about the right to be forgotten, which I assume many of you know more about than me as a concept. So also right to erasure, and here I've dug out. I've cited some source which I have obviously not put on the slide, being the research integrity expert that I am. My PhD is about research integrity. I will correct it. It's from the 2014 Court of Justice of the European Union decision, but it might go further back than that. But at least to me, this concept and discussion has emerged in connection to the GDPR. And this has, of course, been criticized. Some see it as a new human right, and some might, even though they agree, see it as something that is hard to put into practice. And of course, it's not really the right to be forgotten that we're talking about, but the right to not be shown on some Google search results. But still, I see it as an interesting symbol of the privacy discussion. And yeah, it's been challenged from the point of view of freedom of speech and the practicality of application, but not so much from the point of view of memory. And especially, I'm sad and little worried and puzzled about the lack of voices from the community of historical research that have taken part or not have taken part in these discussions. At least that's my perception. Again, if you feel I'm wrong, please do correct me. So this is me trying to give a historian's voice to the discussion. Oh yeah, I have to change the slide also from here. So what would right to be remembered mean in principle and in practice? As far as I know, it's not established in any law or legal precedent. The right to be forgotten applies more to individuals, and then I see the right to be remembered more important when discussing groups of people, especially those kind of on the losing side of history, minorities and other underprivileged groups, women, anyone who's been in the opposition. I find it funny that this hasn't been more broadly discussed, because to me the existence of the discipline of history is a testament to man's wish to be remembered, man's and women's, of course. Okay, so I need to speed up a little bit. So there's a difficult dynamic between the individual and the group levels, which I will showcase shortly. Here's a few examples of the types of personal data that is used in historical research. I personally have experience from interviews and what is called sometimes ego documents, which includes diaries, autobiographies, letters, postcards, which have become an important type of historical sources, especially in the couple of the past decades after the emergence of especially economic and social history. Well, let's not go into these definitions in detail, but what I want to just show by this is that the definition of personal data in the GDPR is extremely broad, and it's broader than just a name or location or it's anything that can be used to identify an individual. So it can also be information about a dead relative. And I'll just skip that. So a professor of history, Kirsi Vainio-Korhonen, has put very well the situation of the historians and historical archives, that they are very rarely, the sources have been created for almost never for the purpose that they are used. They are what she calls a gift from the archivist. So that kind of begs the question, is the GDPR the Grinch who stole Christmas? Well, not exactly. Many of these that challenges have precede the GDPR, but have not been made easier by it. Of course, then there are other legislation that defines what kind of documents are kept for the following generations. National archives probably continue their work pretty much as business as usual post GDPR, but for researchers who generate data themselves, especially for the eco documents, the situation is very difficult. I don't know how many of you keep a diary nowadays in a paper format. It's Facebook and Instagram and other social media where we track our lives, and that's how we get to the point. Why does it matter? Because if we don't have access to a broad variety of sources, there's a risk that the view that we have of life and human experience becomes distorted, and this is me grossly violating the privacy of my family members, but because the faces they are making, I'm kind of counting on them being not identifiable. So I have two cases that I want to really quickly present to you that kind of highlight some of the challenges. A story of Helsinki prostitute Sigrid from the early 1900s that I took from the book of my PhD instructor Antti Häkkinen is one that I'm not going to read now for you in detail, but is showcases the importance of having a microhistory wiki, and the idea is that people could then enrich these data with their own stories and experiences and materials. But the challenge there is that even though the individual documents might not be sensitive, what happens when they are combined, then sensitive or considered as identifiable data, but when the data comes from different sources, it's a whole another story. So now I'm getting to the end of my presentation. So to kind of wrap up, my criticisms to not necessarily just to the GDPR, but the current state of affairs is that the playing field is very uneven for researchers on the one hand and to big corporations on the other hand. It seems that the Googles and Facebooks, the so-called GAFA, they can do pretty much anything they want with human data, and the researchers' hands are more tied. The GDPR doesn't recognize a broad consent. So, for example, the interviews that I have collected, they are identifiable, and it would make no sense to anonymize them because they would be unusable. I can't put them anywhere. No, in Finland, no repository will take them unless I anonymize them, and it's impossible. So they will be lost after I've done my PhD because the consent only covers this my PhD work. And yeah, I think the concept of individual privacy is to a certain extent outdated, or at least too limited, and the group level should be taken more into consideration. And here I present some solutions. They are not perfect, but I'm a fond of codes of conduct because I study them in my PhD. There's ethical pre-review systems in place in the academia, and like I mentioned before, broad consent is something that is lacking, in my view, from the current toolbox. So that's for me. Thank you.